Veritas Aquitus by Bones Boy 15, Chapter 16, Gold. Naruto hummed to himself and tapped his pencil on a pad of paper from where he sat on stage while he oversaw Yang and Weiss prepare the hall for the dance. His notes in his scroll were limited and paper copy always felt so much better. His foot tapped in the air and he nodded his head to a beat that only he could hear. Two fabrics of what seemed to be the same color were thrust between his face and his notepad. Uzumaki, do something useful and pick a tablecloth, Weiss instructed. Naruto looked up at her dryly. I am doing something useful. Useful for me? Do you not see me writing? Right now, Weiss snapped and with a twitch in her eye. All right, this one. Naruto pulled at his orange jacket with a grin on his face. Weiss deadpanned and walked over to the leader of her team with a scowl on her face. I'll just go ask Ruby. You'll also see the glory of orange one day, Naruto argued with a huff as he looked back at his notepad. Don't get your hopes up, Yang said as she walked up with a massive speaker in her arm. She set it down with a bang that caused the nearby seated Ruby to jump slightly, but the girl's depressed face didn't change until Weiss shoved the pieces of cloth in her face. Yang looked over at her boyfriend to see him bobbing his head again to a beat. Curious, she peered over the edge of his paper and pouted when Naruto pulled it from her view. Hey, I'm the one that asked you to do something for the entertainment. No spoilers, Yang. Naruto returned with a grin as he continued to write in his book. You did what? Weiss asked with a frown. Busted. Shut up, Whisker Boy, Yang hissed before she looked at Weiss sheepishly. He volunteered to help. I said I'd do what needed to be done. She's the one who put me on entertainment. Yang Xiaolong, Weiss got at her. The fog machine are one thing, but letting your troll-making hooligan of a boyfriend take care of entertainment for the party that we're in charge of. Hey, you're getting your stupid doilies, aren't you? Yang shot back. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he wrote in his notebook. Doilies. You be quiet. Weiss glared at the lounging teen. She looked back at her Buxman teammate with a frown. We agreed that I would handle the entertainment, and you were supposed to sort it out yesterday, Yang countered. I have it under control. Well, that's because I already took care of it for you. Is this a bad time? Neptune asked as he and Sun walked in the ballroom to see Yang and Weiss nose to nose with one another. No, you're just in time, nerd boy. Grab a chair and watch the show. Uzumaki, thin ice, Weiss hissed before she spun around and smiled at the blue-haired boy. Neptune, glad to see you. Ouch. Totally ignored by the Ice Queen, Sun mumbled with his arms crossed. Get used to it. Naruto chimed from where he lounged on the stage. Neptune grinned back at the white-haired girl. You too, Snow Angel. Gag me. I think I'm going to puke. Thank you, Peanut Gallery, Neptune said to Sun and Naruto dryly before he looked at the incomplete team of girls. So, are you girls ready to dress up? Please, I'll be drawing eyes from all over, Yang said modestly with a grin plastered on her face. She nudged her boyfriend's foot and got a grunt. I've got the hottest accessory. I doubt it'll be anything other than an orange monstrosity, Weiss said with a roll of her eyes. She looked at the two Haven students. So, what will you two be wearing? This, Sun gestured to his current attire. Neptune cut in front of Sun and held a hand up. Ignore him. He knows not what he speaks. Hey, I may have moved to Mistral, but I was born in Bakuo. It's not exactly a shirt and tie kind of place. Thank you, Naruto exclaimed with a raise of his pencil. He grunted when Yang smacked his foot again. Oi, he's not wrong. Most of our standard academy dances took place under the stars. Heck, I don't remember my grad party, but that's probably because my godfather spiked the punch bowl and then dared me to chug the whole thing. Oh yeah, I remember you telling me about that, Sun said with a laugh. Worst hangover ever, right? An understatement of the century, Naruto drawled as he went back to write it in his notebook. He sighed. Shame too. No booze this time. The librarian won't allow it. Well, maybe not during, Yang trailed off. Yang, Ruby nudged her sister with an elbow. What? Yang arched her brow. Before we go to the after party, is Blake still being Blakey? Sun asked nervously as he rubbed his arm. I mean, it won't really be a party without her. That's what I've been saying. Ruby threw her hands up. Finally, someone gets it. That may be so, but not for the same reasons, Ruby, Naruto added, confusing the young team leader with his words. The whiskered blonde rolled his legs up over his head and kicked up to his feet. He dropped down from the stage and flipped his book shut while he walked to the exit. Where are you going? Yang asked. Getting too loud in here for me to think. See you guys later, Naruto said with a wave. He stuck a hand in his pocket and began to whistle a tune as he left. He seems happy, Neptune said with a furrowed brow. He's excited. Yang has him in charge of the music, Ruby said. Weiss scowled. I never agreed to that. It's too late now, Yang said with a smirk. She pointed at Weiss. You finished up what you need to do for the dance? Her finger then went to Sun. And you don't need to worry about Blake. Lilac eyes drifted to confused Silver. You either. I'll take care of it. What do you mean? Ruby asked as Yang started to leave the ballroom. I have a plan. Don't worry about it, Ruby. You just find a date for the dance, or I'll find one for you. I can't believe that you actually got asked out by that guy, Kurama said as he and Haku walked through the halls of Beacon. The Faunus was grinning madly while his feminine friend was red in the face. I mean, it's one thing since he thought you were a girl, but if he believed you were a guy, I think it'd be even funnier since you're straight. Wait, you are straight, right? Yes, Haku muttered as his cheeks flamed. Just wanted to double check. I don't judge. I doubt I even have a stance to judge from. I guess the most accurate phrase is don't care. But that makes me sound insensitive. Granted, I am a dick, but not that much of a dick. Please stop talking, Haku groaned. Why had Sasuke left him to this hell? Oh, right. He and Kurama were still pissed that Naruto had gotten his way after a long argument that only ended when they conceded defeat. Since Naruto had sought sanctuary with his girlfriend, that left Haku to punish. Sasuke was on the prowl to find a date for himself, which left Haku and Kurama to find some instruments. What? I just think that all romance is beautiful, and yes, that includes Naruto's unholy grouping with his feminine equivalent. I know it sounds horrible to put it that way, but can you imagine the little monsters that could emerge from that couple? Talk about terrifying. And we'd be the first to babysit? Sure, Ruby could, but she eats sugar like it's going out of style. That's not something I could promote. Ugh, someone kill me, Haku groaned and hung his head. Kill you? Why would anyone want to kill you? The two teens looked towards the owner of the voice and found one Coco Adele approaching from behind them. Her hands was firmly wrapped around another belongings to the nervous, rapid-eared faunus that was Velvet Scarlatina. Coco, Velvet? Haku looked between the two with confusion on his face. I thought you two were delayed on your mission. Well, we would have been if Oba hadn't been there. Tell you the details later, but first, we came here for a reason, Coco said as she gave Velvet a look. Velvet shuffled nervously. But Coco, Velvet, we talked about this. Coco grinned as she stepped back and pushed Velvet forward. You got this, girl. Just do it. Velvet stumbled forward and stood in front of her fellow faunus. Her hands fidgeted and stuttered mumbles left her lips. Kurama arched a brow above his pinely sunglasses. When she looked back at Coco, Coco mouthed the word breathe and gave her a thumbs up. Velvet took a deep breath before she faced Kurama and her eyes squeezed shut. Kurama, will you go to the dance with me? Kurama's neutral look became one of surprise. After a minute of silence passed, his raised brow lowered and a light dusting pink appeared on his cheeks. He scratched the back of his head and looked to the side. Well, yeah, sure. You will? Velvet asked as she peeked through one eye at him. Haku blinked and slowly smiled at his teammate while Coco flat out beamed. I mean, why not? It's a dance. It's natural for that someone would have asked, and I guess I'm going with a friend who wouldn't be so bad. Kurama mumbled lowly. A cute friend. Watch it, Adele, Kurama warned with a pointed look at the girl while Velvet flushed bright red. Coco grinned and slung an arm around her teammate. I'm watching, Foxy, and Coco is pleased. Good going, Velvet. Snagged your wild man before someone else would have tried to. Now all we have to do is find Yatsuhashi a date and get Fox to do something with his hair. Coco pointed upward dramatically. But first, I must ensure my adorable little cupcake is dressed to kill for her date. Coco, Velvet flushed brightly as she was dragged away. Haku sent a smirk at Kurama, who looked at him out of the corner of his eye. Not a one goddamn word, Yuki. Not a goddamn word. I didn't say anything. Screw you, Yuki. Go ask the Uchiha out, why don't you? Only if we can double date with you and Velvet. Haku laughed as Kurama let out a frustrated snarl and stormed off. A few passing students from Mitsuru and Atlas clung to the wall or started to fall over, weakened by Kurama's semblance getting the best of him. Haku chuckled and hurried after the fox faunus. Wait, Kurama, we need to color coordinate our outfits. You should wear something red for your velvet cake. Fuck you, Haku. Fuck you. Careful, Kurama. Velvet could get wind of this. A soft chuckle left Haku's lips as Kurama trembled with anger. It would seem the tables had turned, and the faunus was not used to such a thing. It was almost mean in a way, but Haku felt that it was justified considering he had been asked out by a fellow guy who was as embarrassed as Haku, as when Haku clarified he was a male as well. Ah, sweet retribution. A buzz from his right pocket made Haku pull his scroll out and read the message within. His eyebrow rose slightly in confusion, and he looked up as Kurama walked back towards him. The fauna had a scowl on his face, and his scroll was tightly gripped in his hand. "Come on, let's go help the idiot with his plan." Kurama took a step past Haku before he whirled around and glared at the teen. "Say one word to either of them about what happened, and the whole school will be convinced that you are a prostitute before the day ends." All right. I will let you tell them about your date. I'm serious." "I know, Kurama." Haku chuckled lightly as he walked with the faunish towards the location the mass message had told them to go to. Haku would admit he was curious as to what Naruto wanted all of them at the library for. Blake was tiredly scrolling through the screen of information set before her while she sat in the library, with a few other students from the other schools mingling with her fellow classmates. As her amber eyes danced from left to right, there was a quick motion she caught sight of in the corner of her eyes. A red dot slowly crawled onto the screen from the side of the computer. Blake blinked in bewilderment as the dot slowly began to bounce on her screen. To focus on the screen and far too sleep deprived to take any real action, Blake was ignorant to the patterned, almost hypnotic beat that started to play as many Beacon students started to open and close their books in sync with the dot bounce. Her ear twitched when a tinkling bell was rung, and she looked away from the dot. A glance showed that nothing had changed around her, and she looked back at the screen to find the dot had vanished. The synchronized beat of books opening started again, accompanied by books roughly placed on the shelf in rhythm. Blake paid this no mind, far too engrossed in her search, and focused on the screen before her. The dot appeared again, mid-bounce, and Blake followed it. With her eyes, she ignored the bell as it was tinkled time and again. Her narrowing gaze locked on the dot in front of her. Blake looked away again when a tune was whistled in time with the bell and the books. The sound stopped immediately after her gaze left the dot. Blake's eyebrows furrowed in confusion as she wondered what the hell was going on. Deciding to ignore it and focus on her quest, Blake looked back to her computer and opened the new page. The dot returned, accompanied by the music once more. Blake's computer screen went dark, the windows were covered, and the lights went out while the sounds played. Nothing but darkness filled the library, and everyone save for Blake was nearly blind. But the Beacon students continued with their actions, while the students not from Beacon started to use their scrolls to see what was going on around them. A washboard and guitar accompanied the books, whistle, and bells. The dot on Blake's screen returned and started to bounce in time with the books once again. Blake kept her eyes on the dot and ignored the shifting shadows clearer before a voice passed through. On Blake's screen, the dot was replaced by the golden words that bounced in time with the beat. Small interlude here. For those of you guys who's wondering what song it is, it's Gold by Imagine Dragons. Like usual, I'm not gonna sing it because I have a horrible voice. But if you want to listen to it while I read along, that's up to you. You can go and find it. Blake narrowed her eyes as the last text faded away. Was it her, or did that sound like Sasuke? A red-headed male sounded from another school, sung out from a few tables away. Blake rolled around to look at him, and her gaze went wide in slight shock and horror when she saw all the students had donned the white masks of Grimm, similar to the White Fang. An orange-haired girl wearing pink gloves that was opening and closing her book not far away, looked up at Blake. The white grim mask didn't hide the wide smile she had on her face. Blake looked up to see a familiar whiskered teen seated atop a bookshelf, his own white fang mask in place while he crossed his arms over his chest. Before Blake could speak, Naruto dropped down from the bookshelf and landed on the other side of her table. A few computer screens and select lights turned on, but gave off golden hues in the dim lighting. Naruto asked as his semblance slightly came to life, and his body shone the very color he mentioned. He circled around the table and reached out to her, causing Blake to back away from his hand in slight fear. She wasn't even sure if this was a dream or not. A haunting, harmonious vocal came from his lips as he touched her table, and it seemed to solidify into gold. Blake scrambled away and ran down between the bookshelves, passing a couple of Beacon students that wore white fang masks and made grabs at her. Closer looks would have shown that one was a girl with long red hair, and the other was a boy with a pink strand in his black hair. The librarian's occupant's voice sang out as they joined in with Naruto's frightening harmony. The golden lightning, including Naruto's semblance, disappeared and Blake clung to the far wall. She looked around with wide eyes and a bounding heart as she took in the swaying forms of the other students. A surprised yell was let out, but quickly silenced, and Blake tried to determine whether this was real, a dream, or a nightmare. Maybe she'd fallen asleep at the computer. Sasuke's voice came through a public access speaker again as the first beat returned and the harmony dwindled to nothing. Nightmare. It had to be a nightmare, Blake decided. Her restless investigation had gotten to her. She fell asleep reading about a dust robbery, and her subconscious was messing with her. That makes sense. It had to be a nightmare. Even Team Nox weren't this quick to formulate the plan. So to wake up, she'd have to leave the library and go to her room. Then she could get back to work and stop the White Fang and Toshwick. A teen Blake brushed past in an effort to reach the door to the library, saying lowly as he reached out to her with his offered hand. His golden tail swished briefly against her leg, but she paid it no mind. Began another that popped around a corner, his mask inches from Blake's face. When she stopped, had she looked closer before she ran down the nearby alley, she would have noticed that he had short cropped blue hair. Around her, the melody started up through the voice of the other students, and the lights returned to the eerie gold setting they were in. Blake kept her eyes open, and her ears twitched as she watched out for Team Nox's leader. A mirror appeared in front of her just before she neared the end of the book aisle. A teen dressed like Haku usually did outside of class stepped out of the mirror. The one difference he and Haku had was the white mask on his face. It was round and had black slits for eyes, while two red and slightly yellow waves came from the left of his face and curved below the eyes. Naruto's voice came from above Blake as the knot Haku drew Snowfall and cracked the whip. The mirror disappeared behind the masked teen while Blake shakily backed away. Not Haku advanced as the rest of the library occupants joined in Naruto's course. Blake turned and ran through the aisle. She pushed her way past the blue-haired teen and made a break for the door. The creepy chorus echoed around her as the blonde-haired boy with an armored black jacket, a John look-alike with a grim mask, made a grab for her. The door, when she reached it, was locked. Blake turned around and her bagged eyes went wide as Team Juniper, along with Sun and his team, stood opposite of her. The way that the lights flicked and the grim mask made them seem much more intimidating. The public access speaker came to life again, but the chorus seemed closer. A glance to her immediate left, where the librarian, not good witch but a nice older woman named Melinda Reed, usually stood behind her counter. In Mrs. Reed's place was a teen dressed in Sasuke's normal battle attire, but with a ringed helmet that had three karma-like holes on it. Sasuke's grip on the public access speaker slacked, and he, along with Team Juniper and Sun, disappeared as the lights went out. Blake tried to quell her beating heart and looked around nervously as the whistling bells and books continued. The dimmed golden lights exploded on the opposite side of the room as the chorus continued. In front of her was the silhouette of another faunus she knew. For a moment he looked like an older partner, but when she focused, she could make out Kurama's features easily, especially the white mask that concealed his eyes. His hand shot out and grabbed her head as the word gold echoed around her. No! Blake jolted away in her seat in front of the computer. A few students nearby shushed her, and Blake grimaced in embarrassment. She looked around, her heart rate calmed as she took in the unfamiliar faces plain to see, absent of the grim masks that haunted her. A glance at a nearby clock showed that hours had passed since Blake last checked, far too many for her to simply be engrossed in work, but enough to support her theory that what she just experienced was a dream, a nightmare. What that meant, however, was something Blake wasn't sure of. Blake looked back at her computer and recognized the data on the screen as the same data she was looking at before she had fallen asleep. She looked around for any signs of a red dot, but it seemed to be there. Blake's eyes narrowed on the dot and she bristled as it danced cheerfully on the screen. The seemingly happy dot traveled down to her hand and Blake glared at it. Not only was the damn thing in her nightmares, but now it was distracting her. Blake furrowed her brow and looked around for the source of the dot. When she glanced back, the dot had flickered away before it reappeared on her hand. She followed the dot with her eyes as it traveled down the spot beside her table. The dot rushed off towards the library doors and then rushed back. It circled around her foot and table leg. Annoyed with distraction, Blake stood and decided to find the source of the dot and stop them, even if it meant kicking someone where it hurt. The dot danced gleefully in front of Blake's feet, forcing her to keep her eyes on it as she walked away from her desk, lest she lose track of the dot. This was insulting. It made her look like a cat chasing a laser pointer. Granted, the irony was a bit humorous, and this would be an interesting story to tell her team later, if they weren't already the cause for it. But first came the beating, then the investigation, and then the story, in that order. The doctor led her all the way to the library's exit before it vanished entirely. Irked, Blake looked up and glared at the source of her annoyance, her teammate and partner, Yang. Really, why wasn't she surprised? Yang bought the damn thing after Blake revealed her true species to them. She was miffed if it didn't cause Blake to spaz out like a cat. But apparently, the fact it annoyed Blake must have made it worth its money. Blake decided that she'd destroy the laser pointer after she'd chewed Yang out. Before she could even begin to do just that, Yang grabbed her arm. Glad you could make it. Come on, we need to talk somewhere a bit more private. Blake was then dragged away from the library with a scowl on her face. That dream wasn't a nightmare. It was a premonition. Red dots and gold. They had to mean watch out for Yang. Naruto played with a paddle ball while he stood outside of the lecture hall. Yang had acquisitioned to have the heart-to-heart with Blake. Naruto had the paddle ball only to keep himself busy, so he didn't eavesdrop entirely. He may have eavesdropped only a little bit, but he learned something very interesting in the process. It wasn't about the attack on Yang and Ruby when they were younger. He already knew about Yang's search for her mother. It was bound to come up when Naruto asked how and why Yang knew Junior in the first place. She was surprisingly open, possibly due to Naruto trust in her when he told her that Team Nox was trusted with. It only showed how close they'd become in such a short amount of time that she told him her true failure as an older sister. There was a tidbit that Yang had left out. Yang had only told Naruto that they were saved, and Naruto had assumed it was their father who came to the rescue. The name she mentioned to Blake as she told the story was far more interesting. Crow. The name was infamous in Bakugo, more so for the horrible tales about him in his time during a small conflicting between Vale and Bakugo. The Scarecrow, the children called him. He would come to Bakugo and snatch children's fingers if they ever disobeyed their parents. The story was rooted to a battle where another famous figure in Bakugo had snuck behind enemy lines. That figure was none other than Naruto's godfather, the Toad Sage. Naruto learned the truth when he was on his trip with the older man, and they overheard a mother warn a boy after he acted out in public. The Scarecrow sliced off my finger. The Toad Sage had guffed at the thought. Do you see my hands, brat? Are they missing any fingers? Crow didn't cut my finger, Naruto. He cut my fingernails. Broke through my semblance to do so with that weed whacker of his. It was impressive, but now the word of mouth must have made him into a monster. Poor guy. That young Crow would never hurt anyone too seriously. He fought to disable people, but kill grim. This is the difference between a huntsman and a soldier brat. One protects their country, the other protects the world. I'll save a dance for you if you show me the same courtesy. Yang's offer broke Naruto from his trip down memory lane. Yang smiled at her boyfriend as she shut the door to the lecture hall behind her. I think that went well. Probably. Naruto agreed and slipped his paddle ball into his back pocket. The two walked side by side, close enough to touch each other if they so chose, as they started to walk down the hall towards the teacher's housing. They had to report back to Kurna and Asuma still. And you were so sure that your librarian plan was needed? Yang snorted with a smirk. Told you I could handle it. Naruto shook his head. I never believed you couldn't. Then why did you go through with that stupid plan? Yang asked as he crossed her arm over her chest. First of all, don't act like you didn't like it. Naruto gave his girlfriend a smirk and she rolled her eyes. Okay, fine. It wasn't bad. I wouldn't open with it though. It's kind of heavy. Which is exactly the point of it, Naruto said. He slipped his hands into his pockets and smiled lightly. The sounds distracted Blake enough for her to not recognize the faint smell of Asuma's cigarette alongside the aroma we filled the library with. Still not cool with the whole drugging my teammate thing, Yang said blandly as she gave Naruto a pointed look. Naruto shrugged. The human mind is the strongest muscle, Yang. People underestimate it all the time, especially when it looks like you don't use it. Uh-huh. There was a slight possibility that, when one considered how Blake acted, she might not have been as susceptible to your understanding of her obsession, Naruto said. He arched a brow when Yang punched his arm. Ow! What was that for? Doubting me? I didn't doubt you. I doubted Blake. After these words left his mouth, he received another, much harder punch, strong enough to bruise Naruto while his semblance was passive, which meant it was hard. Ow! That's for doubting my teammate, Yang huffed. She wasn't acting like your teammate, Yang. Naruto said with a grimace as he rubbed his arm. Blake was sleep deprived and running on fumes. As a faunus, her body has different requirements from you or I, and a healthy amount of sleep is one of them. Humans need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, but a faunus sleep cycle can range from between 8 to 10 hours or more. It really depends on the animal traits they have. And how are you so knowledgeable about this? Ying asked with a raised brow. They rounded a corner and went through the building exits while Naruto answered her. I've lived with a faunus for nearly all my life. Kurama needs no less than 5 hours of sleep to function well, but that's after years of protecting practice in Con. Through him, I've learned a lot about faunus physiology, things like shedding, marking territory, and even heat cycles that are rumored to occur while faunus are not uncommon or with faunus are not uncommon with us. Humans shed dead skin and hair cells every day, and we mark our territory similar to primates do. Heat cycles aren't present, but that doesn't mean we don't have a prime time in our life for reproduction. Way to turn our conversation into sex talk, Naruto. Yang smirked. Shut up, I wasn't done. Not to return childishly with a very mature raspberry aimed at her that made her laugh. Anyway, the theory of the matter is that if our bodies aren't so different than a faunus, which it isn't since the two species can procreate, then why shouldn't our brains be any different? Sure, there's stuff like how much further faunus could see, smell, hear, and etc. But I'm talking about psychology. With enough sleep deprivation, humans can start to lose their grip on reality. Their minds are overworked and the body will shut down so the system can recover. Yes, I took those same classes in my basic academy, Naruto, Yang said with her arms crossed once again. What's your point? That the dream you cocked up was really clever? Oh, you put Blake in a music video? How original. A psychological scare, Naruto corrected firmly as they walked across campus. Like I said, the sounds were to distract Blake's conscious brain from recognizing the odor in the air. I really have to thank Kurenai for her help on the lights and the timing, though. Lights and timing? Yang asked with a raised brow. Yeah, well, this was a spur of the moment thing, so we couldn't just practice it, Naruto said with a shrug. Kurenai's semblance allows her to influence the minds of others, like an illusion, to trick you into thinking something you're seeing and or doing is real. She has it nearly mastered to the point where she can use her semblance on nearly 100 people at once. That's some real evil mastermind stuff there, Yang mused with a small shiver. She was glad that Kurenai wasn't the villain. That would be scary, though now she was slightly curious about what else Kurenai could do and what she did when she was alone with Asuma. Naruto, unaware of Yang's growing imagination, nodded in agreement. Yep, we should be lucky that she's a huntress and not a madman or madwoman out to conquer the world in a one giant illusion in order to feed everyone to a plant. Yang gave her boyfriend a dry stare. That's the dumbest evil plan I've heard of, and I've heard Ruby's evil plans to take over the world with endless cookies. It came to me in a dream. Naruto grinned when Yang snickered. I see what you did there, clever. Thank you. I still think I had it handled. She was my teammate and I only had to give her a few pushes, Yang said firmly. Yang, sometimes simple talk isn't enough. Naruto mumbled sadly. He looked up at the fractured moon above them as they stopped in the middle of the campus. I've had my fair share of heart-to-heart moments with some friends, and some usually involved fist. Actually, I think all of them involves fist. Not heart-to-heart then, but I digress. Sometimes, sympathizing and understanding it's just not enough. What do you mean? Yang asked curiously as she followed Naruto's gaze to stare at the moon. Nothing, never mind. It's just something I've never really gotten over. Naruto sighed and looked at the ground. He started to walk away again. Let's go. I'm sure Kurenai and Asuma want to know if the plan worked. Does it have to do with the Fourth War? Yang asked carefully and frowned when Naruto stopped mid-step. The Fourth War was a sour point for all members of Team Nox. It was a surefire way to make the four boys stop any conversation. Sasuke hated them and would turn into a broody bill after the terrorist cell was brought up. Kurama outright loathed them and would begin to rant about how he would end them and anyone like them with violent and graphic detail. Haku had shown himself to dislike the mentioning of it, and would force the one that brought them up to change the subject with his intense and disturbing stare. However, Naruto never gave a specific emotion. He would always just sort of shut down, or rather, rebooted after a minute or two. Then he'd ignore their acknowledgement, or just say that he'd put a stop to them, and that would be it. While Yang wasn't sure what Sasuke or Haku dealt with the Fourth War was, Kurama's was simple enough since he was a faunus and the group was very much as anti-fond as one could get. She was sure that Naruto had lost too much to them, to put any more effort into hating. She'd always fiddled with his parents' wedding. He'd always fiddled with his parents' wedding bands whenever he was distracted, either over something mundane like a test or worrisome like the Fourth War. It was worrying for Yang to see his hand lift up and grab the items after she'd asked him such a question. Yeah, Naruto finally answered. He looked at Yang with a sad smile. They were part of it. You don't have to tell me, Yang said as she joined his side and carefully guided his hand away from the rings. I know, but I want to. Naruto sighed. He looked back at the moon as Yang's hand intertwined with his. Naruto stared up at the moon while Yang kept her eyes on him as he spoke. His name was Gaara of Vacuo, and he was the first person that I ever killed. End of chapter 16.